How much longer can the Saints do this? This is the Who Dats pod. We are talking Saints salary cap, sort of, kind of. Really more so of why the salary cap doesn't matter. Y'all know my feelings on the salary cap. We'll get into that in this video. This is Nick Wright. Take it away, Nick.
Something like that is coming to the NFL in a few years, and it's going to be because of what the Saints have done the last few years. They are attempting to run some form of NFL salary cap Ponzi scheme that we can't pick up on.
Once again, the Saints find themselves.
So the Saints are constantly in the news for trying to maneuver and manipulate the salary cap. They've done it for a long time. They're the best at it. They're known for it, right? So every offseason, you always get this conversation of what are the Saints going to do to get under the salary cap, right? You hear a lot of the Saints are in salary cap hell. That is a bingo word that everyone uses. Here's the basics of what's going on. The Saints have pretty much invested their salary cap into a window or a core group of players. They can then maneuver that money through incentives, through back end, pause, contracts, all of that. But they do that to just invest in that same core. So the conversation really shouldn't be, how are the Saints going to get out of salary cap hell? The conversation should be, should the Saints continue to invest in this core? Should they continue to invest in this team if the team isn't good enough to win the Super Bowl or make the playoffs? Because this idea works if the team is really good, because it guarantees you keep that team together. It guarantees you keep the Taysom Hills and the Michael Thomases and the Alvin Kamaras and whoever you want, the Derek Carrs, the Cam Jordans, the Tyrann Mathieu, the Marshawn Lattimore. It guarantees you at least can keep them. You have the decision to keep them, right? So it blows my mind when we have so much going on in the franchise, and I go on the Saints Reddit, and people are posting about Nathan Shepard's contract renegotiation and how Nathan Shepard's contract is going to get us under the cap. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you this. Nathan Shepard's contract renegotiation has nothing to do with the Saints season. And the idea that the bill will come, like Nick Wright just said, that the bill will be here and the Saints will have to pay. No team in the history of the NFL has showed up on Sunday and the NFL said, bad news, guys. Y'all can't play today because the salary cap bill hasn't been paid yet. I'm not a financial advisor, okay? But this is similar to me to like a Home Depot bill or a Best Buy credit card where, do you got to pay it? Sure. Is it real money? Probably not. Go get that Xbox, ladies and gentlemen. Charge that PlayStation. Light it up on the Best Buy card. No one's coming, okay? You pay the minimum, pay the minimum. That is what the Saints are doing with the salary cap.
And cap hell. This has been a talking point around the Saints for years, and every year they get under the cap, and this year will be no different. However, how much longer can the Saints continue to kick the can down the road? The Saints are once again...
I think they could probably, theoretically, again, I'm not a financial manager, I would think they can kick the can down the road forever with this core. Now, the core eventually will move on. The Saints will move on from some of these players. They'll choose not to restructure their contracts. And then they probably will have to truly manage the cap. Because right now they're just masking contracts and incentives and salaries that are attached to players. But once those players are gone, then they probably have to do a total reshaping of the cap. So again, the mindset of the salary cap being this like boogeyman, it really should be, how long will the Saints choose to finance this nucleus? How long will they choose to finance this team? And then as fans, we shouldn't say, man, I wonder how we're going to save $3.7 million a year with Nathan Shepard's back-end incentives. We should be saying, is this team good enough to fund? Is this team good enough to do all this to keep them around? Are we a playoff team? Are we a Super Bowl team? Because if not, then all of this seems like it's kind of, you're jumping through a lot of hoops to keep together an average team.
And over the cap and need to find a way to get under before the new league year, which is March 13th. So how exactly can the Saints get under the cap, and how much longer can they continue to kick the can down the road before they have to take the hit on some of these contracts and the dead money? Now maybe this isn't a question of how much longer can the Saints do this until the bill is up, because honestly they could do this forever. It's more of a question of, should they keep doing this? Should they?
There you go. There we go. Now this young man, and I'm not talking about Mickey. This young man talking, starting to get to the meat of the issue. Starting to get to the meat of the issue of it's not how long they can, it's how long should they.
Continue to invest in the team that isn't a game or a player away from winning a Super Bowl. And the way the Saints manage the cap isn't the best way to manage the cap space ideally, but there isn't really a right or wrong way to manage the cap, because teams with the most cap space don't always have the most success, and the teams with the worst cap space don't always have the least amount of success. It really depends on who the general manager and the owner is and how they invest their money. And the New Orleans Saints find themselves in this hole because they went all in trying to win a Super Bowl with Drew Brees before he retired. Exactly what they should have done.
Yeah, I mean, basically what happened with the Brees thing is that we had a lot of aging players like Brees who we wanted to keep. We also had a very strong draft class of young players who then we wanted to keep. The Alvin Kamara's, the Marshawn Lattimore's, the Michael Thomas's. So in order to simultaneously keep our aging players and to extend our young core players, that's how we got into the situation we're in now. Now it's flipped. The young players who we funded back then, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Marshawn Lattimore, you know the drill. They are now our aging players. They are now the contracts that I would consider like our core foundational contracts. Like back then, Drew Brees and Cam Jordan and players like that were our kind of core. So it's the same thing. It's just shifted. It's just shifted from who the players are. Back then the young players were Alvin and them, and now it's kind of moved on. But he mentioned that this was a bad way to handle the cap. I don't think so. I don't necessarily think so, because you do want to keep together a team that you think is good enough. And a lot of teams fail to do that. A lot of teams have a real hard time keeping together. Like the Seahawks are always an example I use. Once the Seahawks paid Russell Wilson, then they started losing players all over the place. They started dropping defensive players. They started dropping offensive players. And then they kind of fell apart. It's very difficult. Like the Bengals are kind of going through that now because the Bengals had so many young players on their rookie deal. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. And now you just saw them, they had to franchise T. Higgins. So it happens all around the league. Best case scenario is you luck up into, or not luck up, I guess, but you draft or however, you get a young player on a rookie contract. That's the best case scenario because that rookie contract is so small, then you can invest the cap in filling other holes. Like the Rams. The Rams are in a great spot right now. Some of their best players are on nothing deals. The 49ers. Brock Purdy is on a nothing deal. He's making like, $80,000? I mean, his contract is nuts. If you go look at Brock Purdy's contract. That's a big difference. Like when you have a quarterback who's making whatever Brock Purdy's making, the same as some streamers on Twitch, and then you've got other teams where their quarterback's making $200 million, right? You can move that money around to fill holes and fill gaps, but once it comes time to pay Brock Purdy, the Niners are going to be in a real problem because now they got to they're losing some of those resources.
Done, and nobody should blame them for that. The only issue is
basically what the Saints are saying as far as the resources. What the Saints are saying is that we don't need any other resources. We're good. We have our resources right here. So we're going to fund these resources, and then we're going to get like very minimal, we're going to bring in very minimal other players, and then we're going to try and win. And that is the biggest crux of the issue, ladies and gentlemen, are the resources that we're attached to and funding, are those resources enough? It would be enough if we could hit on draft picks because those draft picks would be so cheap, which is why I keep saying we have to draft impact players. The way you do this is you end up with the next Jamar Chase, the next Justin Jefferson. You find that wide receiver, or you get the next TJ Watt, or you get the next Myles Garrett in some defensive end. And then for a couple of years there, your best resource, or one of your best resources, is a cheap rookie player. And you're getting a ton of impact, a ton of value out of that. The Saints, unfortunately, haven't done that. I mean, we've done the opposite. We've whiffed on our draft picks.
They didn't get a Super Bowl out of it, and now they're stuck in cap hell every single year, trying to get under the cap with all these restructures. However, Drew Brees is retired, and he's been retired for almost 3 years now. But the team is still being run as if they are still a player away or two from winning the Super Bowl, as opposed to gradually cleaning up the cap, taking the hit on some of these contracts and taking the dead money cap hit when they should. I mean, look at what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did this season. They did exactly what the Saints should be trying to do, taking the hit on some of these contracts, trying to clean it up, have a mediocre year, and the Buccaneers still managed to win a playoff game in the division.
Yeah, I don't think those are comparable at all. I mean, the Buccaneers got fortunate with the way that the division played out, but the Saints could have been the Buccaneers this year with a made field goal here or a coin toss game going differently there. I don't think the Buccaneers are a great example of what a team should do.
Meanwhile, the Saints invested in Derek Carr, brought back Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael, basically did everything they could to win the worst division in the NFL, and they still managed to miss the playoffs. So the whole cap hell thing doesn't really actually exist. The Saints were in cap hell last year and decided to sign Derek Carr for $100 million guaranteed.
That's what I'm saying. Like he nailed it. The cap hell that what you read on Reddit and what you see on Twitter and what everyone talks about doesn't actually exist. There isn't a cap hell. The Saints are in quote unquote cap hell, and we went and got Derek Carr for $200 million. So it's just so crazy how it's like, how are they going to do this? How are they possibly going to, manipulate the money? What's going to happen? I mean, what's the worst case scenario? What do y'all think is the worst case scenario? Like Nick Wright was saying at the very beginning of the video, the whole idea of like the bill is going to come. It's not. That worst case scenario is not going to happen. They're not going to lock the doors. They're not going to turn the lights off. The water isn't going to stop running in the Superdome. I mean, it might just because of the infrastructure of New Orleans, but it's not going to be because the NFL wants their monthly check.
Up to $150 million total. Every year, the NFL media is always talking about how the Saints are going to have to cut Alvin Kamara, get rid of Demario Davis, trade Marshawn Lattimore, and every year the Saints don't have to really do that unless they want to. Now, 2020 was a little different due to the pandemic. The NFL salary cap was significantly lower than it should have been, causing the Saints to cut a few players like Emmanuel Sanders. However, since then, the Saints haven't really had to cut anyone of importance. They just had to restructure contracts.
Something else to remember is that salary cap is generally tied to profitability of the league, right? It keeps going up. So if you make this kind of idea that, okay, we're going to keep pushing our bill, quote unquote, forward, you also kind of gamble that the salary cap will constantly be getting raised because of the profitability and how big the NFL is. And we just saw that. We just saw the salary cap get raised again. So then you get more resources. You get more credit, I guess you could say. Just like to go back to the Best Buy credit card thing, where if you rack up a decent credit card limit, as long as you pay your minimums and you pay a little bit extra, they may end up just boosting your credit. They may end up kind of extending the timeline that you have to pay all that. Now, again, ladies and gentlemen, can't stress this enough. I'm not a financial advisor, okay? But that's what the Saints are doing, and they have been correct. The NFL has raised the salary cap.
At a point now to where how much longer should you be restructuring these contracts if you're not in an opportunity to win the Super Bowl, if you aren't a player or a game away from being in the Super Bowl? If you're a 9-win team, what is the point of restructuring all these contracts and going all in for win now mode, even though you haven't had 10 wins since 2020 with Drew Brees? The Saints aren't the 49ers. The Saints aren't one good player away. They need to get younger and better at almost every position on the team. And when that is the reality of your team, that's when you should be thinking about taking the hit on some of these contracts and some of the dead money and starting to gradually clean it up as opposed to going all in every season. The Saints general manager Mickey Loomis will do what he always does and go all in as if they're winning the Super Bowl. This is both good and bad. For this scenario and this season, that is bad. The Saints aren't in a scenario or a circumstance to be winning the Super Bowl. They don't have the head coach, and they probably don't have the quarterback to do so. And that process for the Saints of getting under the cap has already begun in the 2024 offseason. The team was just about $80 million over the cap just a few days ago. However, the NFL set the 2024 salary cap to $255 million, meaning that is how much each team and each organization can spend. So what that means is the Saints have about $330 million in spending, and they need to get that down to $255 million in spending for the 2024 season, and they have until March 13th to do that. And if they can't do that, they'll be fined, they won't be able to sign anyone, and in some cases, you could have draft picks taken away from you. However, you don't need to worry about that, as the Saints started the process of getting under the cap a few days ago by restructuring Pro Bowl center Eric McCoy's contract, saving $7 million in cap space. Now this is a good move because Eric McCoy is a young player, a foundational piece for the future, and he's one of your best players. Restructuring the contract of Eric McCoy is good. You don't have to...
Yeah, I mean, a good example right here. Like, they want to keep McCoy, young player, foundational player on the line, so they restructure it. They guarantee they keep his rights, and they guarantee that they keep him on the team. They move the money around. Like this is just commonplace now in New Orleans. This is exactly how they do it, exactly how they've been doing it. This is just kind of how, I don't want to say it's a loophole, but they've kind of found this pseudo loophole with the cap, how they can restructure it.
To worry about him for the future, you want this guy on your team for as long as possible. He hasn't hit his prime, and he's going to be a huge piece as to what you do in the future. It's the contracts like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Ryan Ramczyk, those are the ones you should be scared to touch and restructure, because those guys are nearing the end of their careers, and they also aren't putting up as much production as maybe you'd hope them to do. Even players like...
I mean, Demario Davis was incredible last year. I'm not sure why he lumped him in there. Demario Davis was probably a top 5 linebacker in the NFL.
Tyrann Mathieu and Derek Carr, you could argue you should leave their contracts alone. However, that's not going to stop the Saints. And speaking
they've already
of Derek
restructured
Carr,
Carr's contract.
Saints did restructure his contract, saving $23 million in cap
Exactly.
space. Now, some were hoping they wouldn't do this because now that basically ensures that Derek Carr will be on the team for a minimum of 2 more seasons, the 2024 season and the 2025 season. I don't disagree with this opinion, but Mickey Loomis is going to do what Mickey Loomis does, and he's going to invest and be in win now mode. And getting Derek Carr's restructure helps them free up some space, and it gives them a lot more wiggle room to sign players in free agency that they want. And the most recent move that they made was the restructure of defensive tackle Nathan Shepard, saving...
I mean, here's the Nathan Shepard stuff, but let me go back to that line of thinking, because that line of thinking I don't agree with. So the line of thinking there is, you can either... So we have Derek Carr. We can either restructure Derek Carr and then have more money to go sign free agents, or don't restructure the Derek Carr contract, because then you may be able to get away from Carr in a season or two, but you won't have any money to spend on free agency. You're basically guaranteeing that you won't succeed. We have Derek Carr. We went and got him. Why would we not restructure to get free agents to make everything better? I want a GM. I'm not saying Mickey Loomis is the best GM in the NFL, but I want a GM who's constantly trying to win. I want a GM who's constantly trying to win games, better the team, take a shot, even if it means winning 10 games and winning the NFC South and doing that. Like, we can do that. We absolutely can win the South. We absolutely can be a playoff team. We absolutely can win 10 games. We should have done it last year. I mean, you're a couple games away from being an 11, 12 win team last year. And I don't think anybody here would say the Saints were great last year. So I'm totally cool with a GM whose mindset is, if we can better the team and try and win, we're going to try and win. Do I think the Saints are the 49ers? No. Do I think they're a legit Super Bowl contender right now? No. But that doesn't mean that Mickey should say, all right, well, we're probably the 5th best team in the NFC. We're probably the 6th best team in the NFC. So let's just go ahead and let's just get out of some of these contracts. Let's take the hit. Let's get rid of some of our best players. Let's just play with league minimum contracts and win 4 games, and we'll just restructure everything. Like, who wants that? What fan wants that? I'm if I was a GM, I would be doing what Mickey's doing. I would just constantly be reshaping and restructuring contracts to go and get more talent to try and make a better team. Because like this guy said in the beginning of the video, he compared us to the Buccaneers. We're kind of trying to be the Buccaneers. Like we're trying to be the team that wins a bad division, sneaks into the playoffs, upsets a first round type team like Philadelphia, and all of a sudden you got a great year. That's a very results oriented kind of mindset, which we talk about, which we preach against all the time. The difference between us and the Buccaneers were what? A couple coin flips? Like 3 coin flips, somewhere in there? You win those coin flips, we are the Buccaneers. So did what the Buccaneers do, salary cap wise or any of that stuff, is that why they were in that position? I would say no. No, I don't think that's the case at all. Right? So You know, I mean, and maybe I'm off base there. Like maybe fans are okay with those like restructuring years or those dead cap years or those kind of years where you're just cleaning, you know, you're cleaning out the pantry. But I'm happy we have a GM that doesn't do that.
About $3 million in cap space, and after all these restructures, including one a few months ago in Marshawn Lattimore, which did save $11 million, but that restructure did make a trade possible and put a trade on the table for Marshawn Lattimore. So after the restructure of these 4 players, the Saints sit about at $38 million over the cap. And the Saints could honestly get under the cap with the restructuring of just 5 players, but here are some names that you can expect the Saints to restructure: Carl Granderson, Cesar Ruiz, Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, and even if they shouldn't, they're going to restructure contracts to guys like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, and Ryan Ramczyk.
Carl Granderson is a great example. This is the Braves do this all the time in baseball, but Carl gets paid, right? They give Carl a big contract. Then they immediately restructure that big contract. They did it with Michael Thomas. They do it with Taysom Hill. That is the blueprint, right? You pay the guy. You give the player the years. You get their rights to then you can maneuver. Then you immediately maneuver. Then you immediately save. And then if you do it the next year, fine. If you can keep doing it, keep doing it. So yeah, I would assume anyone who has signed a big contract in the last couple of years will get restructured. We've already seen it with Carr. He already got restructured, and I guarantee you we'll see it with Granderson probably by the time this video comes out.
Now, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Taysom Hill or Ryan Ramczyk maybe get a pay cut due to their age, production, and the overall contract that they have right now. If the Saints ever want to get out of this never-ending cycle of getting under the cap every single season, the best way to do that is draft a lot better. Hit on first-round picks. Don't have Trevor Pennings and Peyton Turners. Have Chris Olaves and Brian Brzee. And not only do they need to have better first-round picks, but they need to have just better draft classes in general. The 2020-18...
Agreed. But that has nothing to do with the cap. Like that's where I'm at, where we're having this conversation, and really the crux of the issue is the Saints need better players. The Saints need better resources. You know, if we're going to pay the resources, they need to be better. They can be better if we just draft better, which is why all the time talking about quote-unquote cap hell should be spent talking about the first-round pick, should be spent talking about pick 14, should be spent talking about what we're going to do in the 3rd round. You know, like, the answer is simple, and we see it all over the NFL. Get good players. Bring good players in. And if you want to bring cheap good players in, you got to land in the draft. The Rams went from this team is going to be terrible to, wow, this team is set up pretty nice here because they got Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams. I mean, players like Puka Nacua, Kyren Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, those are impact players for really good teams. And what, Kyren was a 7th-round pick, and Pacheco was a 7th-round pick, and Puka was like a 6th-round pick. Yeah, you can have those draft classes, but you have to land the draft. There's a big difference between getting those players and then getting Trevor Penning, Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport. You know, I mean, Paulson Adebo is our shining example of a good draft pick recently, and he's not like super impactful. You're one class away from finding the next Amon-Ra St. Brown or the next Jamar Chase or the next, you know, Sam Laporta or players like that from really changing the outlook of your team. I mean, I keep talking about Brock Bowers. If the Saints draft Brock Bowers and Brock Bowers is a top 3, top 4 tight end next year, all of a sudden there's not going to be a whole lot of draft talk or cap talk, because we're going to have a super explosive offense. We're going to have one of the best tight ends in the NFL on a rookie contract, and no one's going to care about this quote-unquote cap hell. So all of this energy of, you know, getting out your protractors and your compasses to try and figure out the cap, it needs to go into player evaluation. It needs to be bringing in better resources. That's what the talk should be.
2019 and the 2020 NFL draft for the Saints are a big reason why the Saints have had a lot of failures over the past few seasons. Only a few players from those 3 draft classes have contributed to the Saints. Marcus Davenport was a bust in the rest of that 2018 draft class. Eric McCoy and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson are the only 2 good players from that draft, and Eric McCoy is the only contributor. In the 2020 NFL Draft, aside from Cesar Ruiz, everyone else was a bust. But in the last 3 draft classes, the Saints have started to pick stuff up, getting guys like Paulson Adebo, Pete Warner, Chris Olave, Alante Taylor, even Brian Brzee, Kendre Miller, A.T. Perry. The draft classes have gotten better, and they need to continue to get better if they want to get out of this cap hell. Don't trade away future draft capital for drafts now. Save those up. Build for the future as opposed to building for now. Getting younger allows you to move on from contracts, and it doesn't force you to bring back guys who you probably shouldn't bring back, but only time will tell whether or not the Saints can clean up the cap space.
Yeah, I think, this video kind of proves it, but I just think people are using cap hell and contracts and dead money and all that. They're using that as like a synonym for get better. This guy surmised it at the end here with just get better players, draft better, right? So that shows you the real issue is not the cap. The issue is we got to draft better players. We got to bring in better resources, which I 100% agree with. 100% agree that, yeah, if the Saints want to be better for the future, if we want to be a better team overall, you got to draft better, and you got to start reloading. You have to start. That's what the draft is for. You have to start reloading at impact positions and impact players. That's it, 100%. Even like someone like Jake Haener. Jake Haener. I know. I'm picking like very specific situations, but Jake Haener could have been Puka Nacua, right? So when you look at it like that, we just have to find the players. We have to find those impact positions to come in and take us to that next level. The Saints they're not right now, they're not a Super Bowl team. But if you told me the Saints were about to draft players like Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams, and we had 2 players like that are about to be impactful, and I don't mean those positions, I mean like that level of impact, I would think, yeah, that would boost us to probably be one of the best teams in the NFC. If we were drafting players like that had that much impact, we could turn it around just like that. For sure. If we drafted a defensive end who had the impact that Puka Nacua had on the Rams, but defensively, just that alone would probably propel us to a legit double-digit win team. So the moral of the story here, ladies and gentlemen, is you got to get away from the cap talk. Cap talk that's for Mike Florio and NFL and NBC. That don't worry about the cap. The cap is going to figure itself out. The cap will be there. We'll be under it. We will be able to play football on Sundays. They will not turn the lights off in the Superdome. Promise. Dome dogs will be grilled in the Superdome. What we need to focus on is the draft. What we need to focus on is the coaching staff, the philosophy, the scheme, the strategy, the game plan, all that. That's what actually matters. Go down to the comments below. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.